village of Seiferdau, southern Prussia, an 8-year-old boy with dreams of flying leapt from a second-story window, clutching an umbrella as his makeshift parachute. The umbrella, unable to withstand the strain, turned inside out, and the boy plummeted into a flowerbed, breaking his leg. That fearless child was Hans-Ulrich Rudel, who would one day become the most decorated German serviceman of World War II and a legend of the Luftwaffe. Rudel's journey to realize his dream of becoming an airman was fraught with challenges. From humble beginnings and youthful mishaps, he rose to epitomize perseverance and daring. Throughout his career, Rudel adhered to his personal maxim, "He is only lost who gives himself up for lost," a philosophy that guided him through countless brushes with death. As a Stuka dive bomber pilot, Rudel demonstrated extraordinary bravery and skill, flying more than 2,500 combat missions and destroying hundreds of enemy vehicles, tanks, and even battleships. His ability to press on despite overwhelming odds and severe injuries, including losing a leg, cemented his place in history as one of World War II's most celebrated aces. Rudel's life, from a boy's leap of faith to the perilous skies of war, was defined by unyielding determination and a relentless drive to conquer the impossible. Hans-Ulrich Rudel, born on July 2, 1916 in Konradswaldau, Lower Silesia, was the son of a Lutheran pastor. While his academic achievements were modest, Rudel excelled in physical pursuits, channeling his energy into sports. At just 10 years old, he taught himself to ski, developing a lifelong love for the mountains and outdoor adventure. This athleticism and determination would later define his character and serve him well in his military career. Rudel's early ambitions were grounded in aviation, but family circumstances forced him to abandon his dream of civil air pilot training. With the family's limited finances directed toward his sister's medical education, Rudel instead set his sights on becoming a sports instructor. However, fate had other plans. The creation of the Luftwaffe offered Rudel a path to fulfill his dream of flight, setting him on a trajectory that would lead to a remarkable career as one of World War II's most iconic pilots. This twist of fortune not only changed Rudel's life, but also paved the way for his place in military history. In 1936, Hans-Ulrich Rudel gained entry to the Waldparkwerder military school, setting the stage for his journey into the Luftwaffe. Although he aspired to become a fighter pilot, Rudel volunteered for the emerging Stuka dive bomber units to avoid being assigned to the traditional bomber command, which he saw as less prestigious and more limiting. However, Rudel's sober lifestyle, he abstained from alcohol and preferred milk over stronger drinks, set him apart from the hard partying culture of his fellow pilots. Combined with his initial reputation as only an average pilot, this earned him a degree of isolation within his peer group. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, Rudel's skills were still deemed insufficient for frontline combat. Instead, he was relegated to aerial reconnaissance duties, where he demonstrated diligence and reliability, earning the Iron Cross Second Class, despite being far from the action. While Stukas thundered over France in 1940, Rudel found himself assigned to training new pilots, a role that frustrated his desire for direct involvement in combat. By the time of the Balkan campaign in 1941, now an Oberleutnant, Rudel remained on the sidelines, stationed at reserve flight in Graz. However, this period marked a turning point in his career. During training exercises, he displayed newfound precision and coordination, keeping his Stuka so close to his wing leader that it seemed connected by an invisible tow rope. His accuracy in bombing and gunnery became exemplary, hinting at the brilliance that would later define his wartime exploits. Despite these improvements, Rudel's reputation as a lackluster pilot followed him. Deployed to Greece, he was still prohibited from flying combat missions. Listening enviously to the roar of engines as his comrades took off for the Battle of Crete, Rudel was left grounded, yearning for a chance to prove his worth in the skies. This patience and persistence would soon pay off, launching him into the annals of Luftwaffe history. Rudel's talents finally found their stage when Germany launched its invasion of the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941. For hours each day, often from 3 a.m. until late into the evening, Rudel piloted his Ju-87 Bertha Stuka over the battlefields of Belarusia, relentlessly attacking Soviet supply columns. The characteristic wail of the Stuka's sirens announced its deadly presence as Rudel and his comrades transformed enemy convoys into seas of wreckage, wreaking havoc on the Red Army's logistics. In the skies, Rudel found a kindred spirit and mentor in Hauptmann Ernst Siegfried Stein, a leader of Group 3 of Stuka Geschwader II, known as the Immelmann Wing, a unit named in honor of the famed World War I German ace Max Immelmann. Stein quickly recognized Rudel's daring and precision, nicknaming him that crazy fellow for his tendency to dive dangerously low during attacks to ensure pinpoint accuracy. This audacity exemplified Rudel's commitment to his craft and willingness to push the limits, even in the face of extreme danger. Rudel's fearless approach did not go unnoticed. On July 18, 1941, he was awarded the Iron Cross First Class, an acknowledgement of his growing reputation as an extraordinary pilot. This marked the beginning of a remarkable career on the Eastern Front, where Rudel would continue to refine his skills and earn his place among the Luftwaffe's most celebrated and decorated aces. His partnership with Stein and his relentless sorties over Soviet territory set the foundation for the legendary exploits that would follow. The Immelmann Wing soon joined the siege of Leningrad, where on September 16, 1941, its Stukas targeted the formidable Soviet battleship Marat, a 23,500-ton behemoth caught in open water. Rudel, alongside his mentor Hauptmann Ernst Siegfried Stein, led the attack. While Stein's bomb landed as a near miss, Rudel's 1,000-pound bomb struck the ship directly, delivering devastating damage. However, when reports confirmed that the Marat had survived the attack, Rudel was consumed with determination to finish the job. Undeterred by the heavy anti-aircraft fire bursting around Kronstadt harbour, which he likened to the clap of doomsday, Rudel braved enemy fighters and intense flak to make his second attack on September 23rd. This time, he carried a 2,000-pound bomb, a weapon of immense destructive power. Flying low to ensure accuracy, Rudel released the bomb from a perilously low altitude of 900 feet, completely absorbed in striking his target. In his fixation, he failed to consider the fragmentation radius of the bomb, which extended up to 3,000 feet. The resulting shockwave struck his Ju-87, momentarily blacking out Rudel and nearly sending the plane into the water. Skimming a mere 10 feet above the surface, he regained consciousness thanks to the frantic shouts of his rear gunner, Alfred Scharnowski, who exclaimed, "She's blowing up, sir!" Rudel's bomb had hit its mark, triggering a catastrophic explosion that tore through the Marat, leaving the ship heavily damaged and listing. This daring raid cemented Rudel's reputation as a fearless and relentless Stuka pilot, willing to take extraordinary risks to achieve his objectives. The destruction of the Marat became one of the defining moments of Rudel's career. Rudel spent the brutal winter of 1941 in the Rzhev sector, enduring some of the harshest conditions of the Eastern Front. German forces, weakened by a crippling lack of winter supplies, frozen fuel, and widespread frostbite, faced relentless assaults from fresh Soviet Siberian divisions, well prepared for the freezing temperatures. Amid these desperate circumstances, Rudel and his fellow Stuka pilots became the thin line of defense, repeatedly taking to the skies to repel Soviet ground attacks. On more than one occasion, the Stukas were forced to defend their own airfields, strafing and bombing enemy forces that threatened to overrun their positions. Despite these challenges, Rudel's skill and determination did not go unrecognized. On Christmas 1941, he received the German Cross in Gold, a prestigious award honoring his contributions to the war effort. Just a few weeks later, in January 1942, he was bestowed the Knight's Cross, cementing his reputation as one of the Luftwaffe's most capable pilots. Shortly afterward, Rudel was temporarily reassigned to the reserve flight school in Graz as an instructor. On his journey to Graz, he took a brief but momentous detour to his home village, where he married, adding a personal milestone to his already extraordinary career. This fleeting moment of normalcy amidst the chaos of war marked the beginning of a new chapter for Rudel, who would soon return to the Eastern Front to continue his relentless campaign against the Soviet forces. Rudel's approach to training was as relentless as his combat style. His new crews faced a rigorous regime of aerial drills paired with a healthy dose of physical training. Morning runs and afternoon swims were non-negotiable. It was as if he were preparing them for a triathlon with a side of bombing runs. But Rudel's commitment to excellence paid off as his trainee staffel, squadron, became a formidable unit, even volunteering to support mountain troops in the challenging terrain of the Caucasus. Flying above the majestic Elbrus Mountains, Rudel found himself momentarily spellbound by the beauty of the snow-capped peaks, lush green meadows, and vibrant mountain flowers. For a brief moment, the war faded from his mind. For a time, I forgot entirely the bombs I am carrying, and the objective, he later recalled. It's a rare glimpse of the human side of a man so often defined by his unyielding resolve. Even amidst the chaos of war, the simple beauty of nature could still stop him in his tracks. Proof that even a Stuka ace isn't immune to the allure of mountain flowers. But knowing Rudel, it wouldn't have been long before his focus snapped back, ready to dive into action, quite literally. By September 1942, Rudel had reached a significant milestone, completing his 500th operational flight, a testament to his relentless commitment and endurance. Barely 2 months later, in November, he surpassed his 600th mission, marking the occasion with an uncharacteristic indulgence in copious amounts of cake. However, any celebration was short-lived as Rudel soon fell ill with jaundice, a condition that left him bedridden. Ignoring the protests of an irate doctor, Rudel, ever determined, staggered from the hospital, unwell but resolute, to assume command of the first staffel of the Immelmann wing, now engaged in the ferocious battle for Stalingrad. By this time, his unit had been re-equipped with the upgraded Ju-87 Dora, boasting greater power and versatility, which proved vital in the close-quarter fighting raging in the ruined city. The chaotic urban warfare demanded extreme precision to avoid hitting German troops, as Rudel and his fellow Stuka pilots dove into perilously low altitudes to support the embattled Sixth Army. For Rudel, the strain of constant flying, illness, and the crushing responsibility of aiding his surrounded comrades brought him to the edge of his physical and mental limits. Reflecting on the experience, he admitted feeling more as if I were in Hades than on Earth, a haunting description of the relentless and hellish battle that consumed Stalingrad. Despite his condition, Rudel's dedication and flying expertise became a lifeline for the doomed German forces, exemplifying his maxim that he is only lost who gives himself up for lost. The battle for Stalingrad would prove a turning point not only in the war, but also in Rudel's growing legend as the Luftwaffe's most tireless and resilient pilot. On February 10, 1943, Hans-Ulrich Rudel reached yet another extraordinary milestone, completing his 1001st operational flight, an achievement that underscored his unmatched endurance and skill as a combat pilot. Shortly after, he was promoted to flight lieutenant and granted a much-needed holiday leave. During his break, Rudel captained the Luftwaffe ski team in a tournament in Austria, recharging his energy before returning to duty. Rudel's next task was testing the newly developed Ju-87 Gustav, equipped with twin 3.7cm cannons mounted under the wings. Though even slower and less manoeuvrable than the bomb-laden Ju-87 Dora, the Gustav quickly proved its worth as an effective tank-busting platform. Rudel recognized its potential and, upon resuming command of the 1st Staffel, began incorporating these cannon-armed Stukas into combat operations during the fierce fighting for the Kuban bridgehead. The Soviet forces relied heavily on small boats to transport troops and supplies across the lagoons in the Kuban region, but Rudel's attacks wreaked havoc on these operations. Within just a few days, Rudel personally destroyed 70 Soviet boats, earning a reputation not only as a skilled pilot, but also as a relentless disruptor of enemy supply lines. His exceptional efforts during this campaign did not go unnoticed. On April 1st, 1943, he was promoted to the rank of Hauptmann Captain, and just 2 weeks later, on April 14th, he was awarded the Oak Leaves to the Knight's Cross, further solidifying his status as one of the Luftwaffe's most decorated and impactful pilots. Rudel's integration of the Gustav Stukas into the Luftwaffe arsenal marked a significant evolution in the German Air Force's anti-tank capabilities, with his personal ingenuity and fearlessness ensuring their success on the battlefield. As the war dragged on, Rudel's relentless contributions continued to inspire awe and respect, even among his enemies. In July 1943, Hans-Ulrich Rudel and his Stukas played a critical role in the Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle in history and a desperate bid by the Germans to regain the initiative on the Eastern Front. Flying the Ju-87 Gustav, Rudel unleashed devastating attacks on Soviet armour, swooping down to altitudes as low as 15 to 30 feet to fire his 3.7cm tungsten core shells. The precision and power of his cannon blasts punched through the thin, rear armour of Soviet tanks, transforming Rudel into one of the most feared tank hunters on the battlefield. However, such daring attacks came at great personal risk. To land a successful shot, Rudel had to fly directly through the fiery explosions of his own targets, subjecting his aircraft to the full force of debris and shrapnel. The intense heat scorched his Stuka, while splinters riddled its fuselage, forcing Rudel to pilot a battered plane through wave after wave of enemy defences. By the end of the first day of the offensive, Rudel alone had destroyed 12 Soviet tanks. While Rudel's Gustav Stukas focused on hunting tanks, Dora models carried out bombing runs against Soviet anti-aircraft positions, which had become the bane of Luftwaffe pilots. Others circled overhead to guard the vulnerable Stukas from Soviet fighters. Despite these concerted efforts, the Battle of Kursk proved to be a brutal and costly affair. The Germans inflicted heavy casualties, destroying vast numbers of Soviet tanks and men. Geopolitical pressures weighed heavily on the German high command. With Anglo-American forces landing in Sicily, Adolf Hitler, wary of a new front opening in southern Europe, ordered the offensive at Kursk to be called off. The battle, intended as Germany's last great push in the east, instead became a decisive Soviet victory, marking the turning point in the war on the Eastern Front. For Rudel, the ferocity of Kursk was yet another test of his resolve, and his efforts further solidified his legacy as one of the most lethal Stuka pilots. On July 17, 1943, Hans-Ulrich Rudel assumed command of Group 3, Stuka II, at a critical juncture in the war. The relentless Soviet advance following the Battle of Kursk forced the Germans into a desperate retreat toward the Dnieper River, which they reached by August. Under Rudel's leadership, the Stukas became a vital component in slowing the Soviet onslaught, targeting advancing tank columns and supply lines with devastating precision. His fearlessness and tactical acumen proved instrumental in buying the Wehrmacht precious time during this chaotic phase of the Eastern Front. Rudel's tank-busting skills continued to reach new heights. Flying the cannon-armed Ju-87 Gustav, he destroyed tank after tank, his tally reaching 100 confirmed kills by the fall of 1943. This milestone further cemented his reputation as the Luftwaffe's premier ground attack pilot, and his achievements did not go unnoticed by the Nazi leadership. On November 25, 1943, Rudel was summoned to Hitler's Wolf's Lair, the Führer's headquarters in East Prussia, where he was awarded the Swords to the Knight's Cross. The decoration, one of the highest honours in the German military, recognised his unparalleled contributions to the war effort. Despite the grim trajectory of the war, Rudel continued to serve as a rallying point for the beleaguered Luftwaffe, even as the odds increasingly turned against Germany. Rudel's Stukas, ever in demand, were transferred from the southern front to assist in breaking the encirclement of the Cherkasy pocket and then back south to support operations north of Odessa. By March 20, 1944, Rudel had earned yet another promotion, now holding the rank of major. Shortly thereafter, he led a daring attack on a key Dniester bridge, a mission that would test his mettle in ways he could never have anticipated. During the sortie, a new pilot in the group, struggling to keep formation, fell behind and came under fire from Soviet fighters, forcing him to crash land in enemy-held territory. Rudel spotted the downed crew waving from beside their wrecked plane in a nearby field. Without hesitation, Rudel landed his own Stuka to attempt a rescue. However, the muddy terrain trapped his aircraft, leaving him and the stranded crew dangerously exposed as Soviet infantry advanced on their position. With no other option, Rudel and the crew abandoned the plane and fled on foot, pursued by the Soviets. For 4 grueling miles they ran toward the Dniester River, dodging enemy fire. Their path ended at a sheer cliff overlooking the river. Undeterred, they slid down the steep incline, tearing their hands and clothes on the thorny bushes that lined the descent. Bloodied and battered, they paused only briefly to catch their breath before plunging into the icy, swollen waters of the Dniester. The freezing current was merciless, but Rudel and the other Stuka crew managed to make it to the far bank, collapsing in exhaustion. However, Henschel, one of Rudel's companions, was missing. Despite his own physical limits, Rudel refused to leave a man behind. He dove back into the frigid river in a desperate attempt to find Henschel. Tragically, the current had already claimed him. Later, Rudel reflected, "If I had succeeded in catching a hold of Henschel, I should have remained with him in the Dniester." After escaping the icy waters of the Dniester, Rudel and his companions encountered yet another peril. A party of Soviet soldiers armed with Tommy guns. With no clear way out, his companions surrendered. Rudel, however, refused to give up. Dodging a hail of bullets, he made a desperate break for freedom. A Soviet bullet tore through his shoulder, nearly causing him to black out, but he pressed on, driven by sheer willpower. As the chase continued, more Soviet troops joined the hunt, some on horseback, others with dogs combing the terrain for the elusive Stuka pilot. Cresting a hill, Rudel stumbled down the other side, collapsing in the mud as his strength began to wane. Under the cover of twilight and pouring rain, the Soviets lost sight of him, giving him a brief reprieve. Despite his injuries and exhaustion, Rudel forced himself onward. The rain-soaked ground turned his escape into a grueling ordeal, with every step a battle against the rising mud and his own physical limits. Mile after mile he ran, his feet numb and his body nearing collapse. Along the way, compassionate Romanian peasants took pity on the battered airmen, sharing their meagre food and providing brief moments of respite. Over the course of what Rudel later called the hardest race of his life, he crossed 30 miles of enemy-controlled territory, evading capture and defying all odds. When he finally stumbled back into the embrace of his comrades in the Immelmann wing, the relief and elation were palpable. Yet his triumphant return was darkened by the somber news of Henschel's death, a poignant reminder of the heavy price paid in such desperate circumstances. As Hans-Ulrich Rudel's reputation soared, so too did attempts by the Nazi high command to ground him. aiming to preserve their most celebrated pilot for symbolic and morale-boosting purposes. Increasingly fanciful operations were proposed for him to lead, accompanied by bizarre displays from Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring. At one meeting, Göring appeared dressed as a medieval archer. At another, he donned a toga, further illustrating his eccentricity. In these theatrical moments, Göring awarded Rudel with two unique honours: the Golden Pilot's Medal with diamonds and the Golden Front Service Medal, the latter encrusted with diamonds spelling out the staggering number of Rudel's 2,000 sorties. Despite these grand gestures, Göring had his own ideas for how Rudel could be best utilised. He proposed that Rudel lead a newly formed Messerschmitt 410 squadron tasked with intercepting Anglo-American bombers. At the same time, Göring spoke with grandiosity about an upcoming Eastern Front offensive, claiming an implausible 300 panzers were ready for deployment, a reflection of the increasing disconnect between Nazi leadership and the dire realities on the ground. Göring's concern for Rudel's safety also prompted him to relay Hitler's direct orders forbidding Rudel from rescuing any more downed crews, a testament to the lengths to which Rudel's daring rescues had strained the patience of the High Command. Though his daring escapades and battlefield heroics were the stuff of legend, Rudel's superiors increasingly sought to limit his exposure to danger, even as they continued to exploit his achievements for propaganda purposes. For Rudel, however, the prospect of being sidelined was as unthinkable as abandoning his comrades, and he resisted any efforts to diminish his active role in the war. As the Soviets pushed relentlessly toward the German homeland, Hans-Ulrich Rudel faced not only the advancing Red Army but also the overwhelming power of the US Air Force. By this stage of the war, American fighter planes, particularly the formidable P-51 Mustangs, roamed European skies in vast numbers after escorting bomber formations. Rudel recalled one harrowing encounter where several hundred Mustangs pounced on his formation of just 19 Stukas. Outmatched and unable to complete the mission, Rudel made the difficult decision to withdraw. It was the first and only time he abandoned an objective, though he successfully brought his squadron home without a single loss, a testament to his leadership and tactical skill. Meanwhile, the Soviet advance reached East Prussia, where Rudel, true to form, ignored direct orders and carried out yet another daring rescue of a downed crew. His efforts continued to earn recognition, including from Field Marshal Ferdinand Schörner, who sent him cakes adorned with the number of tanks Rudel had destroyed in honour of his defence of the Latvian Courland pocket. Rudel's relentless sorties often brought him to the edge of survival. During one such mission in heavy fog, his Stuka inadvertently buzzed directly over a massive Soviet breakthrough. As anti-aircraft and machine gun fire erupted around him, Rudel twisted and turned his plane desperately, trying to evade the screaming metal. The chaos was interrupted by his rear gunner, Ernst Gademann, shouting, "Engine on fire!" Flames and oil quickly engulfed the cockpit, obscuring Rudel's view and sealing his fate. He crash-landed in a nearby forest, the plane smashing into the trees with a bone-rattling impact. Both Rudel and Gademann were injured in the crash. Gademann, a doctor, suffered 3 broken ribs but managed to summon the strength to treat Rudel, who had a piece of metal embedded in his thigh and was concussed. Despite their injuries and the harrowing ordeal, once recovered, he led his squadron back into battle, unleashing destruction on the Soviet column that had nearly killed him. The incident epitomized Rudel's unrelenting drive to fight on, even in the face of near-certain death. His resolve became the hallmark of his legendary wartime career. As the war turned increasingly against Germany, Hans-Ulrich Rudel faced yet another startling challenge during a return flight to Romania. Upon approaching the airfield, his Stukas came under fire, not from Soviet forces but from Romanian anti-aircraft batteries, as the nation had switched sides and aligned with the Allies. Demonstrating his characteristic audacity, Rudel responded by threatening to bomb the staff headquarters of Romanian Air Force Commodore Emanuel Ionescu. This bold ultimatum compelled Ionescu to allow the Stukas to continue using the airfield temporarily, averting immediate disaster. Now in command of the Immelmann wing, Rudel directed its operations to protect the German army's retreat out of Romania and into Hungary. This arduous task saw him alternating between piloting the trusty Ju-87s and the newer, faster FW-190F ground attack aircraft, which offered greater speed and firepower to combat the increasingly dominant Soviet forces. The retreat was a desperate struggle, with Rudel's unit providing critical air support to slow the Soviet advance. In September 1944, Rudel returned to the scene of a recent battle to inspect a newly destroyed Soviet tank, curious about its design. However, hidden survivors within the wreckage sprang an ambush using an anti-aircraft gun to fire on Rudel's plane. A round tore through his cockpit, puncturing his leg and leaving him bleeding heavily. Rudel managed to land his Stuka at Budapest, but the strain caused him to pass out shortly afterward. When he awoke in the hospital, he found a bullet removed and his injured leg encased in a plaster cast. Cutting his prescribed 6-week recovery down to just 8 days, Hans-Ulrich Rudel returned to the front lines to join the desperate battle for Budapest. His relentless determination and refusal to rest embodied the commitment that had become his hallmark. However, his exploits soon drew him back to Germany, where he was summoned to a high-profile meeting. This time, Rudel found himself face to face not only with a beaming Hermann Göring, but also with Adolf Hitler and the majority of the Nazi High Command. On January 1st, 1945, Hitler presented Rudel with the golden oak leaves with swords and diamonds to the Knight's Cross, a unique and unprecedented decoration recognizing his unparalleled achievements in combat. Alongside the honor, Rudel was promoted to colonel, a significant milestone in his career. However, with the accolades came an order Rudel dreaded. He was once again instructed to stop flying. True to form, Rudel stood firm, declaring he would refuse the decoration if it meant being grounded. Hitler's face darkened at first, but then he relented with a rare smile. "All right. You may go on flying," he conceded, allowing Rudel to return to the skies. Back at Budapest, Rudel continued his relentless campaign, earning the Hungarian Medal for Bravery from Hungarian leader Ferenc Szalasi in recognition of his critical support during the ongoing battles. Defying repeated orders to stop flying and shrugging off threats of disciplinary action, Hans-Ulrich Rudel pressed on with his relentless mission to defend the crumbling Third Reich. His combat prowess proved indispensable in the desperate final months of the war. Rudel played a key role in helping Field Marshal Ferdinand Schörner fortify a new defensive front in Silesia, while also assisting Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler in defending Pomerania and Frankfurt on the Oder, critical regions under heavy Soviet assault. In one of his final and most harrowing missions, Rudel confronted a column of Soviet Stalin tanks a mere 50 miles from Berlin, where the Red Army's inexorable advance threatened the heart of Germany. Despite overwhelming odds, Rudel's Ju-87 Gustav destroyed 12 of 13 tanks, leaving just one heavily armoured target remaining. With one cannon jammed and only a single round left in the other, Rudel made the daring decision to attack the last tank. His precision paid off. The final Stalin tank burst into a blaze as his last round hit home. However, Rudel paid a steep price. As he pulled out of the attack, a searing pain tore through his leg, which he later described as feeling like a strip of red-hot steel. Gravely wounded, Rudel somehow managed to bring his flaming Stuka back to base, but the strain caused him to pass out upon landing. Hans-Ulrich Rudel awoke on an operating table near Silo, his battered body a price to the ferocity of his final missions. One leg was encased in plaster, but the other had been amputated, a devastating blow for a man whose life had revolved around the skies. Rudel, however, refused to wallow in despair, finding solace in the memories of comrades who had made the ultimate sacrifice. In the days that followed, flowers and gifts poured in from an adoring German public, a tribute to the ace who had become a symbol of resilience in the face of relentless adversity. Recovering in Berlin's zoo bunker, Rudel barely allowed himself time to heal. By April 1945, with the war's end fast approaching, he returned to the cockpit, determined to contribute what little he could to the faltering German defense. To accommodate his injury, his mechanics devised a clever rig that allowed him to control the rudder bar with his stump. The modification was a remarkable testament to ingenuity and Rudel's refusal to be grounded. Yet the strain of flying proved punishing. The constant rubbing reopened his wounds, causing blood to splatter the cockpit and engine during his sorties. Despite the unimaginable pain and limitations, Rudel continued to fly as Germany faced inevitable defeat. For Rudel, flight was not merely a duty but a calling, one he was unwilling to abandon, no matter the cost. By the final weeks of the war, even Hans-Ulrich Rudel, whose loyalty and determination had been unwavering, began to question the sanity of the German High Command. As Germany's situation became increasingly hopeless, Rudel found himself confronting Adolf Hitler directly, frankly stating that the war can no longer be ended victoriously on both fronts. Despite his bold honesty, he continued to carry out missions, believing it his duty to support his comrades on the ground. Rudel's flying finally came to an end on May 8, 1945, when the news of Germany's surrender reached him. Ordered to surrender unconditionally to the Soviets, Rudel briefly considered a final suicidal attack on the enemy. However, his men, deeply loyal to their commander, convinced him to abandon the idea, reminding him of his responsibility to those who had followed him so faithfully. Gathering the remnants of the Immelmann wing, Rudel delivered a heartfelt address praising the men's extraordinary bravery and unwavering loyalty throughout the war's darkest hours. He expressed deep admiration for their sacrifices, urging them to hold their heads high despite the bitter end. Determined to avoid falling into Soviet hands, Hans-Ulrich Rudel made a dramatic escape, crash-landing his Stuka at an American aerodrome in Kitzingen, interrupting a parade formation. The spectacle was met with confusion and tension as an American soldier approached Rudel's cockpit, pointing a gun and demanding the surrender of his oak leaves. Refusing to be intimidated, Rudel brusquely shoved him back and shut down the hood again. In American custody, Rudel remained steadfast and unrepentant. When questioned about atrocities, including the death camps, he denied any knowledge and countered with sharp retorts about the Allied bombing campaigns that had killed women and children. He also pointedly suggested that the Americans investigate atrocities committed by their Soviet allies, a calculated jab at the tense post-war dynamic. His interrogator, frustrated by Rudel's demeanour, labelled him a typical Nazi officer. Rudel was subsequently interned at various US army bases and prisoner of war camps in Germany and France. Though his circumstances were restrictive, Rudel maintained his stance throughout his captivity. Eventually transferred to a German hospital, Rudel leveraged his time there to secure his release in 1946. By then, his controversial wartime legacy had cemented his place in history, not only as the Luftwaffe's most decorated pilot, but also as a polarizing figure who continued to evoke strong reactions long after the war had ended. Disillusioned by a post-war Germany that often placed the blame for World War II on its soldiers, Hans-Ulrich Rudel left his homeland in 1948, seeking a fresh start in Argentina. There, he found a new purpose, working in the country's burgeoning airplane industry and assisting in the development of President Juan Perón's Air Force. Despite his contributions to aviation, Rudel's true passions remained rooted in sports and mountaineering, pursuits he embraced with characteristic determination, undeterred by the loss of his leg. Rudel became an avid competitor in skiing and tennis, demonstrating athleticism despite his prosthetic. His love for the mountains drew him to some of South America's most formidable peaks. In 1951, he made an ambitious attempt to conquer Aconcagua, the tallest mountain in the Americas at 22,841 feet, coming tantalizingly close to reaching the summit. 2 years later, in 1953 to 1954, Rudel joined fellow veterans in an even greater feat, ascending the 22,441-foot Lulailaco, a remote and challenging peak straddling the Argentina-Chile border. Rudel's adventures in the Andes became the subject of his book, From the Stukas to the Andes, where he recounted his post-war exploits and passion for mountaineering. The work offered a glimpse into the man behind the legend, revealing a drive to achieve greatness not only in the skies of war, but also in the peaks of South America. Through these pursuits, Rudel continued to embody the unrelenting spirit that had defined him throughout his life. During a visit to Germany in 1950, Hans-Ulrich Rudel faced personal upheaval when he divorced his wife. She had refused to join him in Argentina, choosing instead to remain in Germany with their 2 children. The separation was further strained by her decision to sell Rudel's cherished medals, including his prestigious Knight's Cross with diamonds, to an American collector, a significant blow to the man who valued symbols of his wartime service. Despite these personal setbacks, Rudel's professional life flourished. Leveraging his reputation and connections, he became a successful representative for major companies such as Siemens and other manufacturers. His work allowed him to maintain a stable income and continue pursuing his passions, building a new chapter of his life in South America while remaining a polarizing figure in the post-war era. Controversy remained a constant in Hans-Ulrich Rudel's post-war life, much of it tied to his political beliefs and connections to former Nazi figures. With the assistance of Paraguayan President Alfredo Stroessner, Rudel played a role in shielding Josef Mengele, the notorious Auschwitz doctor, for nearly 3 decades. Despite this, Mengele reportedly viewed Rudel with disdain, dismissing his opinions as resembling the stupid anti-Nazi material pouring down on young Germans since 1945, highlighting tensions even within their shared ideological circles. Rudel's own views remained deeply entrenched in his wartime ideology. He openly advocated for renewed aggression against the Soviet Union, maintaining an uncompromising stance that placed him at odds with the post-war German mainstream. Rudel also expressed harsh criticism of German army officers who, in his eyes, had failed to fully support Adolf Hitler, further alienating himself from the evolving narrative of post-war Germany. In the late 1950s, Rudel returned to live in West Germany, where his political affiliations brought renewed scrutiny. He joined the right-wing German Reich Party, an openly nationalist, solidifying his controversial image. His political activities drew significant attention, particularly in 1976, when his invitation to an officers' evening of the modern Immelmann wing caused an uproar within the Bundeswehr. Rudel's association with a neo-Nazi party was cited as a direct affront to the democratic principles of the post-war German military, igniting a public and institutional backlash. Hans-Ulrich Rudel's life came to an end on December 21, 1982, when he succumbed to a brain hemorrhage at the age of 66. Even in death, Rudel remained a figure of controversy. His funeral in Dornhausen drew a gathering of his old comrades, many of whom still regarded him as a hero. Among those in attendance were veterans wearing their Knight's Crosses. Some attendees, unrepentant in their beliefs, delivered a final Hitler salute, an act that stirred indignation and highlighted the enduring tensions surrounding Rudel's life and the ideology he had represented. Hans-Ulrich Rudel's extraordinary bravery, unparalleled skill, self-sacrifice, and seemingly limitless endurance are undeniable. Throughout his career, he risked his life 6 times to rescue downed comrades, embodying a level of dedication rarely seen even in wartime. Rudel himself was shot down 30 times, yet never by an enemy plane, always by the intense anti-aircraft fire that he routinely braved in his low-altitude attacks. Over the course of an astonishing 2,530 combat missions, a record unmatched by any pilot in history, Rudel achieved feats that solidified his place as one of the most accomplished combat aviators of all time. He personally destroyed 547 tanks, 2,000 ground targets, the Soviet battleship Marat, 2 cruisers, and a destroyer. His relentless success on the battlefield earned him the attention of Joseph Stalin, who placed a 100,000 ruble bounty on Rudel's head, an unprecedented testament to his impact on the Eastern Front. Even German Field Marshal Ferdinand Schörner, known for his demanding standards, once remarked that Rudel was worth an entire division, a statement that was barely an exaggeration. Rudel's combination of unmatched combat effectiveness made him not just a pilot, but a legend whose wartime achievements remain unparalleled in military aviation history. In his gripping war memoir, Stuka pilot, Hans-Ulrich Rudel presents himself as a heroic and inspiring figure. His story, told with a clear focus on his exploits and hardships, portrays a man of remarkable determination and dedication to his comrades and mission. These noble characteristics, however, are difficult to reconcile with his close ties to Hitler's inner circle and his post-war associations with far-right causes. Despite this, Rudel was never accused of any war crimes, and his combat achievements remain untainted by direct involvement in atrocities. Perhaps the most fitting evaluation of Rudel's complex legacy came from Douglas Bader, the legendary British fighter ace. Although Bader disagreed with many of Rudel's beliefs, he succinctly captured the essence of the man, remarking that Rudel was, by any standard, a gallant chap. And with that, we wrap up today's video. I'm incredibly grateful to have you here until the end. Your support truly means the world to me. A huge shout out to my amazing patrons. If you'd like to support the channel or get access to some exclusive content, the links to my Patreon and Instagram are down below. I hope you learned something new, and as always, I'll see you in the next adventure. Take care and goodbye for now.